So welcome, Kamakshi. Thank you so much for taking out the time and talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So, Kamakshi, you're a chemical engineer by profession and INSEAD pass out with the experience in strategy development and VC investments. Tell us what got you to start Freed. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm all of that, but actually none of that. I definitely am not a chemical engineer by profession. I'm a chemical engineer by education,
Education.
and now
Correct.
MBA by education. And actually, even while studying my engineering, it was very clear that this was not going to be my calling. It's not what excites me. It's not what motivates me. And I wanted to be on the business side of things, but engineering gave me a good pathway into understanding technology, understanding critical thinking and problem solving and whatnot. And so that was never my calling, which was very clear. And yes, I went into the business side of things, and that life is exciting to me. Doing working on strategy, business development, even in the VC space. Being in the heart of all the action without being on the driver's seat. In the startup entrepreneurial world is very exciting to me, but Greed sort of happened not out of professional ambition, but more from a personal need that I felt and then felt so strongly about that I didn't think I could look away from it. And so back in 2011, when I was well, actually 2012, so summer of 2012, when I was in college, I developed anorexia, which is a type of an eating disorder, and I was fortunate enough for it to be diagnosed quickly, and I was quickly put in touch with a lot of support resources. And my parents were extremely accommodating and understanding, and that really helped accelerate my recovery from the eating disorder. And so it took me about 2 years, 2.5 years to be quote unquote out of danger.
Right.
And then remember I had graduated and taken up a job in Singapore, and in the middle, I had about 3 months to spare before I started my job, and went back to India. I studied in the US, and then I came back to India. And around that time, it's a big shift. It's a lot in your life is changing. You're finally going out into this big bad world, and all these uncertainties and whatnot. And eating disorders have a way of creeping up when your mind is a bit vulnerable. And so I felt like I needed some support. So I started looking out, and I started to try to see what's available in India in the form of resources. And lo and behold, there was absolutely nothing. In fact, even the two people that I did see, two psychologists that I managed to find with extreme difficulty, I just I could not deal with that at all. I mean, it was extremely
Couldn't
triggering because
connect with them. They couldn't connect with you.
not at all. In fact, if anything, I felt it was more detrimental than helpful. And that was extremely, disappointing to see, because I was just thinking about all this immense help that I had to get over my eating disorder. And then by virtue of speaking about it so freely and openly with my friends and my family, cousins, etc., I had started to observe a lot of other people who also had signs of eating disorders, but had absolutely no idea what to call it. Their families had no idea how to address it. And of course, I could tell, by virtue of not having any resources available to them, they were suffering in silence.
Right.
And so at that very time, it was extremely clear to me that this was something I needed to do something about. And of course, it came from a personal need from wanting to also have access to resources in the country. But it was also from a point of view of, I was fortunate and I was privileged enough to have all of this. So I must do something, for other people in the country. So that's sort of what planted the seed in my head. And that's like 2015. So it's a while ago. And of course, state of mental health awareness and access to resources has improved since then, but it's still nowhere close to the filling the need that we have. That gap is just tremendous. And even the extent to which that awareness goes is, I think, limited to depression and anxiety and, those mental health health concerns, not necessarily more nuanced mental health concerns like eating disorders, personality disorders, etc. And so even today, that's a challenge, but that's how, it's always been on my mind. But 2 years ago, when I was at my MBA and then COVID happened, I was amidst a lot of high performing individuals who suddenly saw their lives turn upside down. And it's typically around, such situations when you start to use substances to fill whatever voids you have to, like, avoid feeling chaotic feelings.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of people, specifically South Asian women, use food as a way to cope with their emotions. So there were people who were water fasting, and I'm guilty of those behaviors and thoughts myself. And so by no means do I claim that this is a thing of the past for me as well. But I observed a lot of these behaviors: people binging, people purging, people starving, at least restricting their food intake, talking talking down at themselves about their bodies, and a very high level of body dissatisfaction. And so it brought back all of those memories. And I was taking a class in sustainable impact and social impact and sustainable impact. And I thought, this is a great breeding ground for me to start putting a business plan together. And then the minute I started, I knew it was more than just a side project. So that's my long story on how I got to Freed.
No, that's really amazing. And you know that, and I would really like to kind of accept on this platform that I am one of those people. I did not know, or rather, I said, I have to say, I didn't know anything about it. And, after talking to you, it opened my eyes substantially to know and read about the topic and understand how important it is and how real it is. And, like you said, we just don't know that, a whole lot of us are actually suffering from it and doing nothing about it. So actually that gets me to two questions that I have for you, Kamakshi. One is, being the first organization who's taking on this cause in a structured manner, what are some of your biggest challenges that you faced?
So many. So of course, we're not the first people to talk about eating disorders in the country, right? The first cases that have come up that we've read about in research and in publications have dated back to the 60s. And a lot of it can be traced back to the role that media played in society at the time, on top of cultural norms that already existed in India. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. But in terms of us being the first organization, I think there's definitely maybe through this platform and by putting the word out there will be people who reach out who are trying to do the same thing in pockets, but at least I have not come across that at all. So to that degree, yes, amongst the first organizations to create a structure around this. The challenges, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is just the stigma around mental health in general in the country. But and I expected that going into this. What I didn't expect is the second layer of sort of added stigma that I face by virtue of being in a more niche mental health space, which is eating disorders, and specifically in a country like ours, where say a quarter of the population even today doesn't have entire food security, is still living in a way where they are not sure where their next meal is going to come from. And so to that degree, it is a privileged problem to have in a country like ours, right? And so the pushback that I receive in terms of, this notion that eating disorders are a privileged Western problem, it is not something that India has to worry about right now. That has been a serious challenge and a big barrier to overcome, and we've not overcome this yet. That's a sort of a pushback that I get constantly, whether I'm talking to funders, whether I'm talking to, potential partner organizations, anybody I speak to, even the general audience. It seems like people don't take it seriously because they don't think it is an Indian problem, which creates even more difficulty and isolation for people who are suffering from it, right? Because it really does feel like you're the only person who feels this way. Nobody else thinks like you, nobody else feels like you. And that is just such an overpowering feeling when you're going through these emotions. And so that's been a big sort of challenge for us. And of course, a lot of it comes from just a severe lack of awareness about the
Yeah.
subject, lack of education, lack of conversation, and so that's been our focus from the very beginning.
Yeah. As a society, I think we have a tendency of brushing the issues under the carpet and kind of camouflage it with all of other things, saying, yeah, it's not important. Like you said, it's a privileged problem to have. At least we have food on the table is probably considered in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually gets me to this point number two, that I wanted to ask you. That what are some of those trigger points or certain signs that one should pick and realize that maybe they themselves or their loved ones do have it. They need some kind of support in this line.
So one thing I will say as a precursor to that answer is that no two people's journey with an eating disorder is the same. Of course, there are different types of eating disorders that people have, different ways in which these kinds of disordered patterns manifest in our brains, in our lives. And so, yeah, there's different types, but there's also, even within anorexia, even within a certain type, even within the same demographic, even with the same background, maybe familial settings, it can still be entirely different because there are biological factors at play, the genetic factors at play, there are environmental factors at play. There's so much going on that can lead you to that one moment where you first develop such thoughts. And so, there, of course, there are some telltale warning signs that you can look at, but I just want to give one word of caution that this is not, it's not a for all one, it's not a one size fits all situation at all.
Absolutely.
But that said, the common sort of baseline, like I was mentioning, is this need to evade chaotic thoughts or chaotic feelings by distracting yourself in a certain way.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, that comes from either from using food in a or by eating. It doesn't even have to be food in some cases. You could be eating things that are not the conventional definition of what constitutes as food. But either overeating and feeling numb or feeling guilty, and that distracting you from your previous uncomfortable feeling, or starving yourself and feeling this sense of pride by pride because of controlling your urges to eat, and that distracting you from your uncomfortable feelings, or binging and feeling guilt and then purging and feeling relief, and that distracting you from your previous sort of feelings of whatever uncomfortable feelings you're feeling. So there is definitely this common sense of wanting to evade chaotic feelings.
Yeah.
The way in which it can show up as a sign that others can look out for, you yourself can look out for, is often a preoccupation with food and weight. So there's very, sort of strong rules about these are good foods, these are bad foods. If I eat this, it's good for me. If I eat that, it's bad for me. So very, calorie counting macros, very, very strict portion control, strict timings on when to eat. Being nervous about making impromptu dinner plans or impromptu lunch plans, and social anxiety that comes from it, or like frantically looking up menus of the place that you're going out to so that you can make a meal plan. To a degree, a lot of people do that to maintain a healthy diet, but I think eating disorders, people who have a tendency for disordered eating or eating disorders, take it to the next level to some degree. So preoccupation with food is one thing, and then of course your weight, your body, and your body image is a big piece of it as well. So being, high body dissatisfaction has a very high correlation with eating disorders as well. So if you find someone, if you find yourself obsessing over a particular part of your body, or constantly weighing yourself and being really nervous about the weight gain or the weight loss, or looking at yourself in the mirror and really feeling like you gained weight without your clothes feeling tighter, or without any tangible signs of weight gain, if you just look at yourself and feel like you've gained weight, which to some degree can be called body image dysmorphia, that you see things that actually don't exist because your mind is telling you that you're fat, or your mind is telling you that you look ugly. So these are some things that you can look out for. Of course, now within each eating disorders, there are certain things that you can look out for. So, for instance, anorexia is characterized by large periods of extreme starvation and restriction. And so if you see extremely low food consumption and small portions, that can be a warning sign. For bulimia, if somebody runs to the bathroom immediately after meals consistently, that can be a sign, even if you're not sure whether they're purging in some way, whether it's vomiting or taking laxatives or whatever. But if there is this consistent post-meal ritual that they follow, that can often be a sign. Social isolation is a big piece for a lot of eating disorders, because there is often this embarrassment that comes out of not being able to enjoy food publicly. And so, people with eating disorders start to slowly isolate from their friends, families, peers, etc. So I think that those are a few signs that you can look out for. Of course, it, like I said, looks different for everybody, but some things are common.
Oh, actually, this gets me to think, Kamakshi, that there's a lot of overlap that I can see as I was hearing you, with the current state of situation, that people are so self-conscious, and of course the multiple filters that we all are living behind isn't helping the cause. Have you seen, I mean, considering you've been studying the market and you guys are doing so much of research behind this topic, is that something that is adding on to the pressure?
100%. I think what you're talking about is already a symptom. It's not the cause. Us living behind filters is a symptom of something else. I don't think that's the cause for eating disorders. In fact, if anything, there's something behind it that's probably the cause. And I don't think there's enough research anywhere in the world, let alone in India, to really describe what started or what caused eating disorders in certain societies. There is some research to back that, at least in Eastern societies, not so much in the West, but media plays a very critical role in defining social beauty standards, and both for all genders, irrespective of course, it's statistically women more than anybody else, but it affects everybody. So media, I think, the messaging that we see both on social media, in print media, in traditional media, everything has been very standardized, and that standard has changed, right? So I remember a few years ago, the voluptuous curvy figure was what was considered ideal, and at that stage, people who were skinnier or bigger than that exact ideal were struggling to fit in that box. That has now then went to a size 0 fad, and everybody was trying to fit that box. Then now it has changed to a slightly different shape, right? So there's been standards, and those standards have been shifting, but the media has played a big role in what those standards are across the country and across the world. And so I think a lot of these, like, living behind filters, is part of how we respond to popular culture. But also, if you look at Indian culture, right, there's certain things that are very uniquely Indian that make it a perfect breeding ground for eating disorders. There is this sense of social ownership of weight. I mean, everybody thinks it's everybody's business to comment on somebody else's weight. I mean,
Yes.
no matter where I have come from, what I have done
Yeah.
in my life, the first time I meet some mami, bua, chachi,
Yeah.
somebody, they will say, patli ho gayi, moti ho gayi. Like they
Yeah.
will, the first comment is you have gained weight or
Absolutely.
you have lost weight or you look
Absolutely.
good. And
I
more
think
often
body
than
shaming,
not,
to a certain extent, is ingrained in us.
and then, it doesn't necessarily come from that place of body shaming, but
Yeah.
that's just
But
it's such a cultural
uh,
part of
true.
our existence. Like you just can't avoid it, right? And more often than not, at least I've seen this in my experience, if you gain weight, they will show concern. Oh, you've gained weight. If you've lost weight, they will congratulate you. Like, wow, you have lost weight. So of course, if you grow up with that messaging, you start to believe, right? Like if I need validation, if I want external validation, if I want appreciation, I lose weight. Because if I gain weight, then everybody will be concerned and this is not right.
Yeah.
And so, living behind all of these filters is part of how we respond to, how we've grown up. And which is why a lot of the work that we want to do on Freed is also to educate parents and caregivers on how important it is to, how important dinner table conversations are, how important, day to day conversations are from a very young age, because
Yeah.
that messaging really gets ingrained very deeply in people's minds. So I don't think these like living behind filters is necessarily the cause, but for sure it's a symptom of a larger cultural problem
Cultural
and
problem.
societal problem that we have.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
No, that's very interesting, and I so personally, I totally resonate with it because every time like, we all fluctuate, and every time you fluctuate from your weighing scale, you have enough people highlighting that you fluctuated.
I
Irrespective.
know. I know what I look like. Don't remind me. Nobody needs to be reminded that they gained weight. Like
Yeah,
literally nobody.
nobody
So
exactly.
why?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you absolutely. So I mean, and that actually brings us to, like you rightly said, there is a lot of social stigma attached to it, and there's a lot of social pressure that everyone goes around it. So, what are some of the things, while you kind of did bring highlight that we have to be very careful with our dinner table conversation, our conversation with the kids. We need to make sure that our next generation is ready for it. But if you have to give a few pointers, both to the parents as well as for youngsters who possibly are going through a difficult time, because let's be honest, the world isn't the most ideal place right now. uh, what will that be?
Yeah, I mean, anything but ideal right now. But I'm a diehard optimist. I like to believe that there are good things in the future for us. Um, I think for parents specifically, I think, like I mentioned, a lot of eating disorders also have been found to be early onset mental health issues. So early teens, uh, you know, 13, 14, 15, that's sort of the age at which, I mean, of course, it makes sense. Your body hits puberty, your body
Yeah,
starts changing, you're not sure how to deal with those changes. You develop a lot of insecurities. And so that's the age at which you're extremely vulnerable. Your brain hasn't quite developed fully yet either, but your body is changing. And
yeah,
so there's just all this like mixed match of hormones, and in everybody. And
yeah,
so that's because of that, there are early onset concerns. And so by virtue of them being early onset issues, family and education centers, so
yeah,
family and schools and teachers and counselors become the first line of defense for people. And so in order to prevent your child or a loved one from going through these disordered eating patterns and these thoughts that are triggered by insecurities, etc., it's extremely important to be educated, for
yeah.
you to be educated, not for the child to be educated. It's extremely important for parents to
Yeah.
know what nutrition means, what well-being means, what health means, and how to disassociate that from weight. I see so many parents who talk about their child being overweight, fat, this, that, and the other. And by both, talking about that as a concern. For a 13-year-old, that should not be a concern. I
Yeah.
don't care if you think that they are unhealthily overweight. That is not what you need to tell that child.
Mm.
And so the focus has to remain on nutrition, health, well-being, and that means something entirely different than what people might think it means.
Yeah.
People who often visit dietitians and go on diets and follow fad diets, etc. For them, they think they understand nutrition and they're doing this for nutrition and health, but that's not what we're doing this for, right? It's fueling something else in our brain. So it's extremely important for us to disassociate the two and think about nutrition and health in the way it is meant to be thought about. That's one. I think second, open conversations is key.
Yeah.
Most of the times when we see children struggling, it's because they don't feel safe to open up in front of their closest family members, right? Because of a fear of them not understanding, them judging, etc. And so I think it's very healthy to have this environment of it's okay if I don't understand you, you can still talk to me.
Yeah.
And that I think goes a long way in helping someone feel heard and safe. Um, Not just at home, but also in school, which is why a lot of the work that we are doing is also around training educational institutes on how to create that safe space for people to come and share. Especially now in a lot of cities in India, it's become mandatory for
Yeah.
schools to have counselors. And
Counselors.
so, how to educate those counselors on being able to provide the space, being able to have these conversations, if for whatever reason the child can't have it at home.
Mm.
So educating yourself as adults who are taking care of another child, I think would be the first step. Um, for people who are already at that stage where you have some body image concern, for if you have some degree of body image dysmorphia, dissatisfaction, even some emotional eating, stress eating, disordered eating patterns. Um, all I can say is the earlier you seek help, the easier it becomes, to recover from these toxic thoughts. I mean, you can take it from me as someone who did not have early intervention at all. I mean, I was quite deep into my eating disorder when I first, spontaneously got bought, whatever. But it was extremely difficult. And then through the course of my recovery, met a bunch of women, specifically because I was going for a women's focused support group, who had been living with it for decades. And at that stage, I could just see how hard it is to change those patterns that your brain has formed. And
Yeah.
so the earlier we find out, or the earlier you speak to someone about it, and the earlier you ask for help, the easier it is. Which is why it's very, very important that there's early intervention. The third thing that I will say is that um, there is a part of us that feels like we've lost our power whenever there is any sort of mental health concern. These thoughts can feel so overpowering that you don't think that you have a voice to ask for help. But finding that one person, just one person that you trust, that you believe will hear you, even if they don't understand you, just finding that one person and telling them exactly how you feel. Of course, knowing fully well that they might not understand, but just telling them, just hear me out. This is what I'm going through. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. Just telling them, I cannot describe to you how much weight that takes off of your chest. I mean, just one person. For me, it was my brother, and even for him, he didn't understand what I was talking about. But just telling him made it infinitely easier for me to then take the next step. And so just start extremely small. It doesn't have to be asking for help from a psychologist or telling your entire family about it or etc. Just one person,
Yeah.
and I think that goes a long way. And for those of us who might not have that one person, or it might not be clear that that one person exists, we have a helpline which is available for anybody to call and chat, and it's not therapists who are answering. These are people like you and I. They are psychology students, so they understand eating disorders and have been trained to understand and are sensitive to the subject. But that space is meant for reflective listening, for cathartic listening and conversation. And so if anybody who's listening to this feels like they don't have that one person, please just call, talk, we'll listen. So I
Take
think
that
those
baby
would be
step.
my
Take that
little
baby
advice.
step, basically. We need to take that baby step and get it going. And Kamakshi, if somebody is not sure whether this falls in the eating disorder, can they as well call and try to
Absolutely.
understand, explore?
Absolutely. These are again labels that a lot of people don't want, and that's why refrain from asking for help as well. And I'm a firm believer that the diagnostic criteria we have right now are bullshit and should not exist. And definitely need many, many, many more layers of
Okay.
nuance to be actually useful. But they're a starting point to at least understand whether you might be at risk.
Yeah.
And we have a screening tool on our website that helps with exactly that. It's not for anybody else. It's for you to just sit down and introspect and think about what are some patterns that you might be seeing in your life. It's just pattern recognition. And so if you're not sure, even then calling the helpline and talking about it, might bring some clarity. Taking a screening tool, for instance, could bring out some clarity. And of course, I also am a firm believer that everybody can benefit from therapy, from a good therapist. And so if you are, even have slightest doubts that there might be something that is of concern, it doesn't harm to speak to a professional and just explore if there is something there. And if there isn't, responsible professionals will give you that feedback and, help you out in whatever ways they can without making it seem like it's a bigger deal than it is.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. I think it's better to know, and if nothing else, at least you'll be much more aware. And any which ways, I think we need a lot more awareness in the society, because that's probably the way we can try and handle the situation a lot more better.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Kamakshi. Thank you so much for all the wisdom. It was really nice. And like I always say, I always at least take away a lot of information every time I get to talk to you. So I'm really happy.
Thank you. No, thank you for giving me this platform, this opportunity. I love talking about the subject, but it's very motivating when on the receiving end it's received well with the kind of sensitivity that a subject like this deserves. So I really appreciate it.
Great. Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.